Hello and welcome to Literary Notes, a podcast by the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Farming is tough but rewarding work, and poet Jessica Gigot is no stranger to it. She owns a sheep farm in Skagit Valley, and her memoir, A Little Bit of Land, details the challenges and joys of farm life in the Pacific Northwest. In this episode, library volunteer Ren Caldwell sits down with Jessica to talk poetry, swans, and the vibrant farming community of the Skagit Valley. Here's their conversation.
Hi there, I'm Ren Caldwell, and I'm a volunteer audiobook narrator with the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library, and I'm here today with Jessica Gigot. And Jessica is a poet, farmer, and a writing coach, and today we're going to be talking about her book, A Little Bit of Land. And Jessica, is there anything you want to say to just introduce yourself? Who are you?
Well, I'm an accidental sheep farmer, as you'll learn in the book. I'm also a mother. I have two daughters that are 7 and 9. I've been living in Washington most of my life, but I have left for periods of time. But I do consider this home.
Amazing. And we were talking a little bit before we turned the microphones on about your daily routine, waking up early. You're not milking sheep this year, apparently, but we're sort of just kind of easing into your day and doing some writing. What are you writing right now?
Well, right now I'm writing about swans, so that's kind of this interesting seasonal change that happens on the farm. So the lambs are normally born in March, April, and then we milk the sheep throughout the summer and into the fall, and then usually around September, October, we dry the sheep off and let them rest for the winter. And in the Skagit Valley, that's when the migratory swans return from Alaska and the Yukon. And they come back with their young, and they arrive usually right on or near November 1st. And then they stay till February, and they're in the fields. Historically, they would have eaten some native tubers in the ground and grasses and sedges, but we have so many potatoes that get left in the field that's one of the things that draws them to the area. Also corn and barley. And so it's interesting because they're around, and usually when they start to leave is when our lambing season starts. So it's been an interesting relationship, just sort of marking the seasons, and I feel like I've become especially attuned to them in early motherhood. And so I've just wanted to learn more about them. So I'm not a swan expert. I'm kind of a swan enthusiast. So those have been kind of my other animal that I focus on besides the sheep. And I am writing a lot about sheep right now and kind of how to run a sheep dairy. So a more instructive type book. And so those are my main projects. I also write poetry too. And my poetry has more recently centered around mothering and ecological grief, which I touch on a little bit in the memoir, but it's sort of I wasn't intending to write about that, but I think that's what has been on my mind.
Yeah, mothering, your kids are still pretty young. You said 7 and 9?
Yeah.
That's awesome. What are they into these days? Do they love the farm?
They do. They love to help. I wouldn't say they're helpful yet, but they do love to help. My youngest daughter especially has really been helping a lot with my husband getting the sheep out to the pasture, and she just helped me plant a bunch of dahlias this week. And my oldest daughter also loves caring for the animals and being around them. She's a little bit more into technology type stuff, so does a lot of digital art and she loves her coding, which is great. They both they love to run around outside, but then they do a lot of other indoor things too.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
One of the things you talk a lot about in your book is your love for the Skagit Valley, and I would love to know a little bit more about how you talk about it a little in the book, how you found your farm, how you pursued it, and were really seeking a place of your own within the valley. And what was it like when you finally found it, when you were finally in that process of moving in? Like, how did that feel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely looked around for land when I was really serious about finding a place, and sort of in the decade before that was a bit nomadic too, kind of trying to find my place in the world. And I had this very strange sort of inclination towards agriculture, even though I hadn't grown up on a farm. And so I was sort of slowly unpacking, why am I so interested in farming? What is it I want to find? And what brought me to the Skagit Valley was research. So I was studying agricultural systems and working on a PhD, and just really fell in love with the farming community and the landscape, and realized that once I graduated that I really didn't want to move on to another university. I wanted to stay there and be there. And so that was a kind of a multi-year process of trying to find a place. And it was a while ago, and it was actually, around the 2008, 2010 period when, unfortunately, things were very cheap because of the crash,
I remember
financial
that.
crash. Yeah. So, now it is quite expensive to afford land there. So there was just sort of a timing piece, and it was, the time in my life that it felt like I was ready to have a home. And before that, I really hadn't had a home since leaving my childhood home. So, yeah, it felt, exciting, but also incredibly overwhelming, a few days into realizing like you're the person that has to take care of everything. And this was even before having animals. But there were a lot of things I didn't know I needed to know. And so I've been slowly learning that over time. And we've been on the farm. My husband and I weren't married when we moved there, but we are now, and have the 2 daughters. But it's been about 14 years since we moved onto the farm. So it's been a minute.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
And your own path to get there was kind of long and winding, as you said, and
Yeah.
just not being sure, well, kind of being sure on some level, it sounds like, that this was the place you were meant to be, but having all of these other interests and, educational things that you were pursuing and things like that. I wonder if there's someone out there who has kind of a similar dream of owning a small piece of land or having a farm, being in that kind of relationship with nature. Like, is there any kind of, I guess, generic or spiritual advice that you would give that person?
Yes, I have lots of advice to give. And I
Great.
love that you use the word spiritual too, because it is a bit of a calling. And since we've moved to that area, I feel like there's been a lot of younger people moving in or wanting to find land there. And it is still kind of very hard to find land and have access to it. Around the time that we moved onto our property, there was a farm incubator project that was starting in the area called Viva Farms, and that gives people a small piece of land to try out their ideas for farming. And I think that's a really smart thing, to kind of have a place to cut your teeth and, understand, like, do I really want to do this? Because it's a real commitment, and it's a lot of work, a lot of hard physical work. And I had that experience through internships on other people's farms. And that's definitely like my first piece of advice is, go learn from someone else and see how they do it. And, I did have a pretty good assortment of teachers. I probably could have had a lot more before I did what I was doing, but there were a lot of great people to learn from. And that's one of the reasons I really like the agricultural community that I'm in, both in the Skagit Valley, but also sort of the Pacific Northwest, because there's a lot of great people to learn from. And also feels like there's just been this growing movement towards relearning a lot of the practice of agriculture and valuing that as a profession, even though it's a hard way to live. It's a hard way to make money, but it's a very rewarding profession and community.
No, that's really amazing. And I think one of the things that I've been kind of just sort of nervously side-eye watching is, with this new administration that's come in this year, there's so many programs being cut and corners. It feels like just trying to cut corners and make everything more robotic and less connected. And I feel like there's such a large portion of our country that is very much not about that. And we're kind of trying to move the other direction, but sometimes it feels like swimming upstream, I think. So it's really wonderful to read about, somebody who's like, no, I want to do this, and I want to do it in this way. And I found that really refreshing. So thank you for, articulating that so well in your book, just the spirituality of it. And
yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't even touch on that piece, but I think, yeah, for me too, like I have a lot of education, and that's another piece. Like you definitely don't have to get a PhD in agricultural sciences to start a farm, but, for me, a lot of my time doing research was on a research farm, so I had to learn a lot of practices in order to do that work. And I think at the end of the day, the research wasn't fulfilling for me as kind of my daily work because I wanted a more of a deeper connection. And I think that's sort of where the spiritual piece comes in. And I definitely didn't plan on having livestock. Most of my education was on plants and plant biology. I didn't take any animal science classes, and now I have a flock of dairy animals. And so that part has been kind of learning on my own. So I do value the balance between sort of book learning and experiential learning. Um, and and I think that's where the writing also came back into my life, was just the self-reflection needed to stay motivated in doing something kind of hard and challenging, and also making meaning out of that connection to nature and place. I've written a bit about that, and I feel like I have a lot more to say about that too going forward.
Oh, that's fantastic. I can't wait to read more about that. And it sounds like it's given you also a really kind of deep sense and belief in your own ability to listen and learn and connect and just kind of be in community with not just, other farmers and people, but the land
Mm-hmm.
itself, which it's really inspiring. So I was wondering a little bit, you talk about you write about the time that you spent on the Swinomish Reservation
Swinomish,
teaching,
yeah.
and being in community with the tribal population there. And I was wondering, what are some of the things that you learned from that experience that you've taken into your philosophy, both of farm management and then maybe also just living in general?
Yeah, no, that was an important part of the book, and it wasn't actually in the original manuscript because I was concerned about sort of appropriation and how much I had a right to talk about my experience teaching there, because I do like to say I learned as much as I taught when I was at the Northwest Indian College, which is also a land grant college, just like Washington State University is a land grant college. WSU is more focused on ag and forestry, whereas the land grant program in tribal colleges tends to focus more on traditional foods and fisheries. But I found that connection really interesting. I also was sort of astounded that I didn't know we had a tribal college until I had gone through a PhD program. So I just, I had a lot to learn, and the timing was just so strange on that they wanted someone with a horticulture background to help with their foods program and teach biology and ecology classes. So, I did teach quite a bit of Western science, but then I also learned a lot about how I could support efforts for access to food, as well as helping with expanding traditional food knowledge and facilitating the sharing of that. And so, yeah, for me, at the time I was also on our property, was, developing a commercial business. And I think I'm still sort of struggle with the balance between, sort of the efficiency needed to run a business using nature, which is essentially what a farm does, right? Like you got to keep these things alive, and then you're also selling, what you're producing. But also there is a sacredness to, when you plant and noticing the seasons, and sometimes that doesn't necessarily go along with your business plan. And so I think it's really helped me kind of develop my core values around how we treat the animals, the regenerative practices that we use. Sometimes they're not the most affordable practices, but they make a lot of sense in terms of keeping the soil in balance, making sure we're not taking too much from the land. Luckily for us, our property had a lot of sort of hedgerows planted before we moved there. And so, we've tried to maintain that because that also creates a lot of habitat for native flora and fauna. And I think that's an important role of the farmer, to help manage the landscape and also make sure that there's, an acknowledgement of the habitat that's needed. Water is a really key issue everywhere, but also in the Skagit. And so there is a pretty long and contentious history of how water is managed between agricultural lands and the rivers, and salmon, which is a sacred food of the Swinomish people. And, our farm kind of has inherently sort of a light footprint. So I don't feel like right now we don't take too much water on our farm. We don't use it. We actually recycle a lot of our dairy water for irrigation water. But I appreciate both sides of that long history, and I won't get into it too much here, but I think I'm hoping now and in the future I can be a helpful presence in terms of appreciating what needs to happen for ag to be profitable, but also appreciating the really long history of the landscape that we're in and the need to make sure that our waterways are healthy and fish populations are protected. And, I think we all benefit when everything is in balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been, one of the things I've been reading about or seeing more of in the last few years is some land reclamation and native populations buying back with, support from other folks, the land and repopulating it. I was just reading something the other day about bison coming back to a certain area, which I thought was amazing. And I think thinking of all the ways that we can be in partnership is a very important role, I think, of.
Yeah. And the Swinomish tribe, when I was there, they had just put out their climate adaptation plan. They were one of the first tribal entities to put that out, one of the first sort of governmental agencies to put that out. So they're very forward thinking. They're very interested in blending indigenous knowledge with science. And so I appreciate what they have put out, kind of on the table. And there's also a lot of great farmers in the Skagit that are good stewards of the land. I think there's just a need for more conversation, more listening, and just more appreciation too for what we all are going to need to do to adapt to how lack of water or too much water will affect us. I mean, we had a huge flood in 2021, which is sort of after this book, but I've been thinking about that because I remember seeing the swans. It was November of 2021, so it was right before Thanksgiving, and the swans had just arrived, and they were like, yes, this is this is perfect. And meanwhile,
You brought the water to us.
I know. And meanwhile, all my friends' basements were flooding and, farmers were losing greenhouses and all sorts of structures. So we do have to remember that, we share the landscape and we have to manage the water in a way that is sort of sustainable for everybody.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really important. And you write poetry. That's something it seems has been a part of your life for most of your life. I'm not sure when you exactly started focusing on it, but it feels like one of the important ways that you connect to the world and just sort of maintain that connection. You said you're writing about swans right now, but I would love to know, is it the kind of thing where when something comes into your life like the swans, your first instinct is to connect with it via poetry? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think I am I'm a poet. I think that's how I define myself as a writer. The creative nonfiction work that I've been doing more recently is kind of straddles some academic questions that I have, but also in the case of A Little Bit of Land, I was trying to write poems about how I got interested in agriculture or responding to the question, did you grow up on a farm? And the poems just were, they weren't pastoral, they weren't anti-pastoral, they were just not very good poems. They just it was more of an explanation was needed. And I think my poems in general tend to be very short and, focusing on imagery. They're generally autobiographical, but I really like what you can do with white space and with kind of imagining feelings and emotion in poetry. After writing a memoir, though, I realized you can also hide in poems pretty easily, even if it's sort of confessional poetry. So the challenge of trying to write prose and write creative nonfiction versus fiction really kind of forced me to put myself out there a bit more. And so that's not my natural tendency. So I do still go to poetry first, but sometimes, there'll be a line or two or a fragment. And I'm thinking, okay, this is maybe going to be something longer, or this is an idea I need to pursue more of. And with the Swan book too, there's quite a bit of research involved in that book. So it's kind of helping me channel my interests and kind of, I don't know, maybe the swan thing is a fetish. I don't know what it is right now, but I have a lot of information about swans and I've visited a lot of places
it's a special
where swans
interest.
go. Yeah. So I don't know what it is right now. So I'm kind of getting to the heart of what what that is about.
Oh, that's amazing. I love the idea of getting to the heart of something through writing about it.
Yeah.
And I do a little bit of writing, mostly screenwriting.
Oh,
And
okay.
so it's an interesting thing when you feel like you don't know what the character is going to say next until they say it. And then you're typing it out and going, well, that's an interesting direction for this to go. But like,
Yeah.
it came out of my head, but I didn't like put it
Yeah.
there, you know? Does that
Yeah.
happen to you with poetry?
It does. Yeah. Like I took a workshop with Ellen Bass. Gosh, it was over 10 years ago, and it was at the Skagit River Poetry Festival. We have a big poetry festival up there every other year. And it was in the class, I forget what she said, but she said, there's discovery in poetry. Like, don't always go into a poem knowing what it's going to be about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because poems are shorter, you kind of go through that discovery process a bit faster. And so I often will start with a poem, and then if it feels like there's more backstory that's needed to kind of explain the discovery, then I go towards essays. And I've done a little bit of fiction actually more recently, but that's very, very hard. I'm very overwhelmed by the fact that you can just make everything up. It's like too many options. So I will eventually get there. But when I started reading memoir, I started reading a lot of memoir written by poets. And actually Open Books, which is a Seattle bookstore that's excellent. That's all poetry. They have a section on their website that's nonfiction by poets. And I would just say read any book on that list because
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's fun because I just think we naturally pay more attention to detail on the sentence level. Not always, but like this book it's not that long of a memoir, and it took me a really long time to write it because you just sort of you tend to fixate on very specific things.
It's called Open Books.
Open Books, yeah.
Oh, I haven't heard of it. I definitely have to check that
It's
out.
in Pioneer Square, but they have a great website too.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that sounds amazing. I'm obsessed with bookstores,
Yeah.
so I'm always happy to learn a new one.
one.
But I hadn't really thought about the difference between reading nonfiction by poets versus nonfiction by anyone else. But of course, the difference is really plain, right? It's just a way of looking at the world, I think, and also just there's kind of a penchant for making nonfiction very super academic and not as much connecting to the other, ways of speaking.
Yeah.
But I think that's really interesting. Well, that segue is great because I was going to ask you, who are you reading these days?
Oh.
Who are you into?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I just actually finished, there's a British writer who's a fiction writer, but she has a memoir trilogy. Her name's Deborah Levy. And I guess I heard that she had planned to kind of write 3 books over time, but it moves through different parts of her life. And so I loved her work. And her memoirs are actually pretty succinct, which is, not necessarily what you'd expect from a fiction writer. But I really enjoyed reading her work. And let's see, last November, I was in Hawaii with my family. We got away. We got off the farm. We usually only take vacations in the wintertime because that's when everything
else is
quiet.
kind of chill.
Everything's quiet and manageable. And at the time I was there was a writing conference, and I couldn't ditch my family for the whole week to go to the writing conference, but I did stop in for a day, and I heard Marie Howe read, and she is a phenomenal poet, and her new and selected poems just came out, and a lot of her new poems are eco poems, and they were just incredible. And actually, she read the poem Postscript, which you can find online, in front of the ocean, and it kind of ends with the ocean, and so it was just this really perfect moment. And actually, she just won the Pulitzer for that book too. So I'm like, okay, I think other people agree with me. I mean, I knew they did, but anyway, I really have been enjoying her poetry lately.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful I feel like especially right now, I'm really appreciating kind of surrounding myself with other creatives and other people who are kind of looking critically at the world that we're living in, but also thinking creatively.
Yeah.
And that's being really sustaining and grounding for me as an artist, I guess.
Yeah. And I also, we have a great bookstore in Bellingham, Village Books. It's like my home away from home. I'm literally there like every day, just looking. Or sometimes I lead a free writing group there that focuses on ecological issues, and we meet once a month. So it is kind of like a third place for me. And speaking of third place, I love Third Place Books in Seattle too. I've had some readings there, but there's a fiction author that I really love, Lauren Groff.
Mm-hmm.
And she just opened a bookstore about a year ago in Florida, which is kind of at the heart of a lot of book bans. And it's just a really great bookstore that is, carrying a wide range of authors and advocating for a lot of different types of books, sort of in a climate where books are being taken off the shelf. So I did join her book club. So she sends a book once a month, or the book. I like to think she's sending me books, but it's the bookstore that's sending me books. And
Well, sure.
the first book was Emma Donohue's The Paris Express, and it's this kind of takes place over one day on this fast train from Granville to Paris. And so it's just sort of fun fiction. I'm trying to let myself kind of not, read too many serious things these days besides the news. But I've been trying to.
That's plenty.
I'm getting a healthy dose of fiction. Sorry, I could talk about books for a
No,
long time.
I know. I realized I was opening a can of worms, but I do want to know the name of the bookstore in Florida. That's where I'm from originally.
It's called The Lynx.
The Lynx. Do you know where in Florida?
I want to say it's Gainesville.
Oh, that's my hometown. That's
Okay.
so weird.
Okay. It might be St. Petersburg, but I think it's
Okay,
Gainesville.
well, if it's Gainesville, that's my hometown. So that's
and
very
there's a big
strange.
picture of a lynx painted outside. I know
A lynx,
at some
okay.
point I want to go visit all the bookstores owned by the writers that I love.
Yes,
So.
I'll ask my brother. He'll be able to tell me if
Yeah.
it's there or not. But my son is at Western Washington University
great.
right now, so I'm pretty sure I've been to the bookstore.
Oh,
that
I'm sure you have.
mentioned.
Yeah.
But and Third Place Books, I'm going tonight
Oh,
because
fun.
there's a Emily Garland's going to be there talking about AI and
Okay.
and big tech, which should be a really interesting
Yeah.
conversation. That's
Yeah.
a big one right now.
For a little bit of land, this book came out on September 1 of 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And my poetry book prior to this came out in November of 2020.
Mm.
So all the readings for that book were online. And that was fine. I mean, my kids were young at the time, but I did like a reading a month, and I could read with people around the country because it was all on Zoom.
Right.
But this book came out like right when things were starting to open up. So I visited so many great independent bookstores in between Seattle and Portland, like in that fall period, that I'm just sort of like, it was just really special to be able to read in front of people and be in these great bookstores and just remember how, awesome it is to have like, your book on the staff picks and like, just that community feel. It just really reminded me how much I love independent bookstores.
Absolutely. And I feel like I had a similar experience where I was like, Zoom is great and everything. And I'm so glad that we have ways to stay connected during the pandemic and all of that. But also, like, I'm an extrovert. I need to be around people like in life, like actual, breathing the same air as people. And it was a really challenging time. But I totally know that feeling of like reading it over Zoom is not the same as being in the bookstore and being able to pick up a copy of your book. And be like, there it is.
Well, I'm 100% an introvert. I mean, I get so tired after all those readings. I remember it was a really tiring fall, but it was also so great to just, be back in stores and to share this work with people that way.
That's really amazing. What do you feel like, what's one takeaway or several takeaways, if you'd like, that you'd like people to, after reading this book, what would you like them to take with them? How would you like them to feel? Is there any like action you'd be psyched to see them take, or a resource that you'd like them to check out? Or
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There's a few people that have told me, I have a niece or my friend's daughter is interested in farming, so I got her your book, as a reality check. And I do feel like it's really important to not over romanticize farming. Like, we need people to go into farming. We need our farms to succeed. We need local food. There are a lot of great people my age and younger that are working in agriculture, and I think that's really exciting. But it is very hard, and there's a lot of sort of, I think, support that's needed, both, through government grants and policies that make it a sustainable profession. I mean, on our farm, we've sort of decided to do our cheese making seasonally because, we want to do other work. We need to do other work. I think we would get way too tired if we were making cheese year round.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope it creates awareness around what farmers actually need to do their work and sort of what we need to do as a society to support farming as a culture and as a
Mm-hmm.
profession. And with this book, I documented the places I visited, but I was also trying to document my education in agriculture to a certain extent. And I think there's a lot of different ways you learn how to farm. And there are a lot of people I know that grew up on farms that are accountants or are full-time researchers because they do not want to go back to that lifestyle. And,
Yeah.
I get it. But that also makes me sad in a way, so I wanted to kind of be clear about the places where I learned about farming. Land-grant universities especially, I think, are a really wonderful resource, and they're a public resource. And I think the general public doesn't know
Mm-hmm.
that much about land-grant universities. I didn't until I was, in my early 20s and already out of college.
I didn't until
Yeah.
I read your book.
Yeah, and they do, besides just research, I mean, the Master Gardener programs, Master Canning,
Oh, it sounds amazing.
4-H, all of that's run through, counties, but also the land-grant colleges. And so it's a pretty amazing system that, depending on the state, is, not doing great in terms of funding. I mean, all schools are sort of
Right.
not doing great in terms of funding. But I think, if we really fully understood the way that they can support rural communities, as well as urban communities that are directly tied to the farms that surround us. I think, I don't know, I really wanted to kind of share that message with people too, that I had a very good education in a land-grant college, and there's a lot of information and technology that's sort of housed under those types of schools, and we really need that infrastructure.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it. And it's also just such a large responsibility. And then you speak about that a little bit in terms of bringing the sheep onto the farm. That we're not talking about only plants. We're talking about animals a lot of times too. And as a farmer, you have the responsibility for these spirits that are now in your care.
Yeah, and I don't think this is in the book, but I visited a lot of sheep dairies before we started doing that work, and one of the first places I visited was in Wisconsin, Spooner, Wisconsin, where they have an extension center that's part of the University of Wisconsin, which is their land-grant college. And there was someone who had been there for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years with a flock of dairy sheep, and he did a lot of the research on dairy sheep that kind of helped different farms get started. And so that was sort of a core piece of extension work. And I'm really glad that I visited when I did, because they lost funding and that extension center has closed down. And so with that, you kind of lose those resources and information. And there's other groups, and, we have a Dairy Sheep Association of North America. There's other groups that help to kind of hold that information, but, having that in the public domain is really important, and I was able to just visit and learn. I learned a ton. And so that's really key too, is just having those resources. And, the other part of the book too, that I guess, when I finished this book, it ends in 2019, because honestly, I really didn't even want to bring up the pandemic, because it was I haven't even processed the pandemic yet.
Have any of us
I know.
processed
And
it?
and at the point, like one daughter was 2 and one was 4. And so I also am still processing early motherhood, because my oldest daughter will be 10 this year. But just the kind of parallels between mothering and nurturing, and how that goes into my approach to farming, which I would say is sort of a feminine approach to farming. And, I just hope we hear from more female or female identifying farmers in the future, because there's just other ways to be in relationship with land. And I guess that's kind of what I was trying to document as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like you really brought a lot of that into your book, and I definitely got that feeling. And it wasn't that you were using, you weren't talking about like being a feminist farmer or anything like that, but just the way that you used, you were very vulnerable in parts of the book in describing just certain choices that you made, and the way these things sort of came together, and you found all these connection points that I really appreciated.
Yeah.
And so I agree, more voices like that would be really welcome. So I would love to know, for people that don't live where you live and are interested in supporting small farmers. I mean, I know a lot of us in the kind of Seattle and greater Seattle area, it's like, we go to farmers markets instead of, and we try to get a lot of our produce from like, local farmers, but there's also just, a limit to, most people, I'm sure, who are farming in a small capacity don't have the ability to send their things as far out as, I live in Shoreline, and
Yeah.
the Shoreline Farmers Market is great, but I know it's just a tiny portion of the farms that we have in our state that need support and patronage and just awareness. And
Mhm.
so, what are some of the things that people who live in the more urban areas can do to support small farms right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of connection, I think, between Skagit and Seattle, like
Mm-hmm.
pretty direct connections. There's several farms, well, in Skagit and Whatcom, going up to Bellingham, that have community-supported agriculture shares. So
Mm-hmm.
farm boxes, different versions of that come to Seattle. Sustainable Connections is an organization up in Bellingham, and they usually put out a pretty extensive list of CSAs
Mm-hmm.
where you can basically have your produce delivered to you in Seattle at various pickup points. And I feel like it's called Local Foods First is kind of the campaign behind that. So if you look up Sustainable Connections, you'll find links to that.
Cool.
And in the years since we started our farm, there was a local food hub that was created, the Puget Sound Food Hub, and they bring product directly from Skagit and Whatcom down to the Seattle area. So if you're a business or a restaurant, you can source your products directly from a lot of producers in our area that way. And come visit the Skagit Valley. I mean, there's agritourism is a really important part of what we do. And there's two really great resources for that, actually three that I'll mention. One, Genuine Skagit Valley is kind of a label that was created to identify products from our area, but on their website you can find a lot of local producers and there's a map even that you can do, kind of like food trail map.
Cool.
Skagit County Tourism also has an excellent food trail map that you can find on their website, and the Washington Cheesemakers Association, which I'm the only person on the education committee.
Let's go.
Yeah, but we do try to create a lot of resources for cheesemakers, and there's quite a few in Skagit and Whatcom County. We also have a wonderful map that you can do kind of a cheese trail between Skagit and Whatcom. So those are just some resources.
Oh, super
Yeah.
neat. So I've never done one of those. Is
Yeah.
it one of the things where you sign up for like a day and a time and go with a
No,
group, or you
it's
just
usually self-led. It's just a map, and most places have a farm store. Skagit
Okay.
has some really great on-farm, and not really stores, but stands where you can pretty much visit any day, at least in the summer.
Okay. 'Cause that was my main concern.
yeah.
I'm like, I don't want to go knocking on somebody's door.
Yeah, no,
but-
it's pretty clear on the maps, like the hours and where they're
Okay.
located, and there's a few that are even open year-round. But definitely, between like Memorial Day and Labor Day,
Oh, that's
you'll
great.
probably find a lot of great local produce and cheese and lots of other things too.
Well, that's awesome, and I think especially if you can kind of pick your day and your time, for what works with your schedule, then you can just kind of run around and
Yeah.
learn and probably meet some really cool farmers.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
sounds
there are
great.
some really cool farmers.
That's awesome. Well, I would love to know before we kind of wrap up, um, what's next for you? So you're writing your book about swans and working on some other things. What are you looking forward to doing next, whether it's personally or professionally, or like, is there stuff you're excited about for the summer? Like,
Yeah,
where
no,
are
that's
you?
great. Yeah, this summer, one of the reasons we're not milking this summer, we've had 6 cheese seasons, and we started making cheese when our daughters were really little. We were on a tight schedule with them. We're on a tight schedule with the cheese, and we learned a lot. And, we've had kind of some time now to just reflect and do some other family things and spend time with some people in our family that we've been wanting to kind of devote some attention to for various reasons. And we also just have some things that need to be fixed. And so this summer we're redoing a few things, and the wind ripped all the plastic off one of our greenhouses. Like there's just things that we really want to just redo and get fixed up. And so it's kind of nice to have that time. So I'm looking forward to getting back to doing cheese next year, but kind of with a more informed perspective and being able to kind of take all that we've learned and do some things differently. And yeah, I'm just doing a lot of writing too. And so the swan book, and then also writing about just the process of sheep dairying, which is more of a science-y type book. just focusing on also putting together all that I've learned and want to continue to learn, and interviewing people that I appreciate that are doing similar work around the country. So I've been kind of doing a lot of those projects too in the background. And then, our daughters are super busy now too. So I go to a lot of soccer games and swim meets. So just making sure we can all, have some downtime at home and enjoy where we live, and then be out in the world too.
No, that's great. Yeah, it doesn't get less busy as
It
they get
doesn't.
older. It gets a
I
little
know.
more busy, actually.
But we've got a pretty long stint until either can drive. So I am kind of a shuttle driver right now too. But it's really fun to sort of rediscover things that I was interested in, but also see what they are passionate about, and kind of giving them the chance to pursue those things. So it's a very full life, but it's very rewarding.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And you do also do a podcast, right?
I
Where
do.
You interview people.
Everything is seasonal with me, because that's
Well,
how
that's the way to go.
that's how I
especially-
fit it in. Yeah, it's just to have it be, kind of not all the time. But yeah, it's called Her Deepest Ecologies, and it's published on a Substack of the same page, but you can get it on Apple Music or Spotify. And that was just a really, unique chance through the Jack Straw Cultural Center to have conversations with people that I've either encountered in my professional life, or people I've wanted to talk to about, what do we do at this particular moment in time, because we have to kind of be caring for ourselves, and we also need to be caring for the earth. And I think there's something at the core of that is really important to making change last, and to doing things in a different way. Maybe not dramatically different, but I feel like I've spent my whole life, and part of the reason why I wanted to get into farming is because I was concerned about how we were living, about consumption, about where our food came from, and how it was grown, and who grew it. So yeah, I feel like it's been kind of fun, but also nourishing to me to be able to get other people's perspectives.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that you are taking the time to do that. And I think community is the only thing that's kind of keeping me going at the moment, and just doing what I can to invest in that, and also allow myself to receive. I think both of those are equally important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
Yeah,
being here
thank
with us
you.
today. I really appreciate it. And is there anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
Well, I will say, actually, one project is I'm editing a new anthology. It's called Working the Land, Working the Sea, and there's an open call for anyone who has experience in farming, fishing, restoration, traditional foods, if they want to write about their experience. It should come out next year. It's with Empty Bowl Press. I'm co-editing it actually with a woman who strangely lives like down the road from me, Tella Adson, and she is in the fisheries. And so she is going to kind of edit this working the sea part, and I'm going to edit working the land part. But it's been really fun getting to know her and working with the press. So you can go to their website, emptybowl.org, and submit to that.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, if there's any listeners out there that are involved in that kind of writing, definitely check out Empty Bowl. But thank you so much for your time today. It's been a lovely conversation, and I'm really excited to see what you do next. Maybe I'll see you at a bookstore sometime.
Yes, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks, you.
An audiobook version of A Little Bit of Land is currently in production in our studios. It'll be available with the class ID DBC 28289. We'll let you know in a later episode when it's ready for download. If you have any questions or comments about the library, or to see if you qualify for our services, visit WTBBL.org, or call us Monday through Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. at 206-615-0400, or toll free at 800-542-0866. This episode of Literary Notes is a production of the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library based in Seattle, Washington. I'm your producer, Nathan Ureta. Thanks for listening.